Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans from the West Coast. I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, September 17th, 2023, and I'm here with a few thoughts on number 6 Ohio State's 63-10 evisceration of the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers in the Horseshoe yesterday afternoon. Hey, about midway through the second quarter, it was the game I was mostly expecting to see. I said in our preview pod that Western Kentucky was good enough to make things at least a little uncomfortable for Ohio State fans, certainly in the early going of this game. And, there we were. It was 14-10 Ohio State with 8:10 to play in the second quarter. Now, after a strip sack on Kyle McCord at the Western Kentucky 41-yard line, the Hilltoppers would go 75 yards in 7 plays, capping the drive with a 2-yard touchdown pass from Austin Reed to Malachi Corley. And, Reed up to that point was ripping it. I mean, he threw for 81 yards in the first quarter, 91 in the second. And Malachi Corley was giving Ohio State secondary some issues, as we thought he might. He had 66 yards receiving in the first half and looked well on his way to a 100-yard day. And the Western Kentucky defense, which was one of the nation's top defenses in forcing turnovers the last 2 seasons, turned in what looked like, a game-turning strip sack on McCord. Defensive tackle Hosea Wheeler had a free run at McCord on the play to force the fumble. So there we were, 14-10 Ohio State. The Horseshoe had just been silenced by the McCord turnover and the ensuing Western Kentucky scoring drive. Things were starting to feel, a little uncomfortable for the Buckeyes, and that discomfort would last all of 10 seconds because on the next play from scrimmage, Kyle McCord would hit Marvin Harrison Jr. on a 75-yard rainbow to extend the Buckeye lead to 21-10. And that play would start a flurry of haymakers from both the Ohio State offense and defense that quickly ended any notion Western Kentucky would make this a game. Now, in Western Kentucky's next 3 possessions, the Ohio State pass rush made pretty much its first appearance of the 2023 season, forcing the Hilltoppers into 2 different turnovers on downs before the half. Now, trailing 21-10, the Hilltoppers would gamble on and go for it on 4th and 6 from their own 40-yard line. But JT Tuimoloau would force Austin Reed into a terrible throw into triple coverage. Josh Proctor, who actually played very well in this game, almost picked it off. The ball would fall harmlessly to the turf, and the Buckeyes would take over at the Western Kentucky 40-yard line. And on the very next play, Chip Trainum would rumble 40 yards up the middle for the touchdown to put the Buckeyes up 28-10. And at that point, the rout was on. 3 plays later, Jordan Hancock would force a fumble with a big hit on Hilltopper receiver Blue Smith. Davison Igbinosun would recover the ball at the Western Kentucky 48-yard line. 4 plays later, McCord would hit Emeka Egbuka for a 15-yard touchdown pass to put the Buckeyes up 35-10 with 1:55 to play in the half. Now, if you're Western Kentucky at that stage, you have to be thinking, let's run out the clock. We got to stop the bleeding. Let's try to regroup at halftime and get ourselves back into this game. Nope, that was not the approach at all. Now, after a 30-yard completion from Austin Reed to River Helms got Western Kentucky down to the Ohio State 42-yard line, the Buckeye defense would stiffen once again. Tyleik Williams would sack Reed 2 plays later to force a Western Kentucky 3rd down and 10. The Ohio State pass rush would then force Reed into 2 incompletions on 3rd and then 4th down. And on that 4th down play, as much as we've been complaining about the Ohio State pass rush, on that 4th down play, the Buckeyes got pressure on Reed with only 3 defensive linemen. And it was JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer collapsing the pocket on Reed that forced him into that incompletion. The Buckeyes would get the ball back at their own 42-yard line with only 28 seconds left, and that was plenty of time for Kyle McCord to lead the Buckeyes to another touchdown drive. Now, he hit Kate Stover for a 40-yard completion that would get the Buckeyes down into the red zone, and then he would hit Emeka Egbuka again, this time from 14 yards out for another touchdown, and the Buckeyes would take a 42-10 lead into the half, and at that stage, the game was basically over. Now, look, I know Western Kentucky isn't Penn State. I know they're not Michigan. By the way, neither of those teams looked all that great yesterday. More on those teams in a minute. But the Hilltoppers are a pretty damn good Group of 5 team with one of the best offenses in the country. And a lot of folks who are paid for their opinions about college football thought the Western Kentucky offense would give Ohio State real trouble yesterday. And many of those same people were questioning whether the Buckeyes were truly a title contender going into yesterday's game. And rightfully so. I mean, through 2 games, we did not see anything really resembling the team that eviscerated Western Kentucky yesterday. I mean, the last 8 minutes and 10 seconds of that first half were pretty frightening. I mean, you can count on one hand the number of teams that can turn the lights out on an opponent like that. And certainly Ohio State is one of them. And the Buckeyes did it through the air, they did it on the ground, and they did it with their defense, both with their pass rush and some excellent play in the secondary. And I got to say, man, I am feeling pretty damn bullish on this Ohio State team heading to South Bend next week, but more on that in a minute. Now, Kyle McCord finished the afternoon 19-23 for 318 yards and 3 touchdown passes. And the only real blemish on his day was the strip sack in the second quarter. And, that was not a great moment for him, obviously. It looked like McCord had Marvin Harrison Jr. open on the play, but for some reason he hesitated and took the sack. And, of course, he didn't secure the football. But you have to love the response by McCord, because on the very next play from scrimmage for the Ohio State offense, McCord hits Marvin Harrison Jr. for the 75-yard bomb. I mean, I just love that McCord shook off the mistake. He didn't sulk. We didn't see any shitty body language from him like we sometimes got out of C.J. Stroud. As good as Stroud was, some of the body language from Stroud when things weren't going well was left a lot to be desired. And then the very first opportunity McCord got to make amends for his mistake, he dazzles us with that rainbow to Harrison Jr., which traveled, I think, a good 50 yards in the air. Harrison Jr., by the way, finished with 5 catches on 7 targets for 126 yards and a touchdown. Cade Stover caught all 5 of his targets for 90 yards, and Emeka Egbuka caught all 4 of his for 57 yards and 2 touchdown grabs. And it was another nice day out of Travion Henderson in the run game, 88 yards on the ground on 13 carries and 2 touchdown runs. Henderson also had a nifty 27-yard reception on 3rd and 2 from the Ohio State 41-yard line to keep the chains moving on Ohio State's second scoring drive of the game. I mean, there was a Western Kentucky defensive back in position to drop Henderson short of the marker, but Henderson dismissed him and got the ball all the way down to the Hilltopper 27-yard line. We also saw Henderson hurdle another tackler on what looked like one of those frustrating, plays into the boundary. It looked like Western Kentucky had the play diagnosed and was going to go for no gain, but Henderson hurdles the tackler and turns it into a 4-yard gain. And then he would go on to score from 7 yards out on the next play to put the Buckeyes up 14-3. We complained about Ohio State's poor conversion rate on 3rd down. On that scoring drive, the Buckeyes converted 3 times on 3rd down, including Henderson's touchdown run. On the day, the Ohio State offense was better. On 3rd down, they were much better than they were against Indiana and Youngstown State. They were 5 of 10. But, a couple of those 3rd down conversions that were missed were pretty inconsequential and came after the Buckeyes already had a stranglehold on the game. When it mattered, the Buckeyes were much better on 3rd down in this game. On the day, the Ohio State rushing attack finished with 204 yards, 6.2 yards per carry, and 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 from Henderson and 1 from Trainum. And while the game was still in doubt, it was Henderson and Trainum carrying the load. Trainum finished with 56 yards on 5 carries. We did not see Mayan Williams until garbage time. I wonder if Williams is still not completely healthy. I believe he has an ankle or a foot injury of some kind that he's been working through since fall camp. But, overall solid output by the Ohio State run game against, albeit one of the worst, if not the worst, rush defenses in the country in Western Kentucky. Now, I thought the offensive line, outside of the strip sack where it looked like Hosea Wheeler had a free run at McCord, I thought the line did its job. According to PFF left tackle Josh Simmons led the starting offensive line with a pass blocking grade of 86.8. Josh Fryer led the starters with a run blocking grade of 85.7. The line allowed only 3 quarterback pressures, and you have to credit them for the 6.2 yards per carry in the run game. When you don't really notice the offensive line, then I think that they're doing their job, and I think that probably best describes the performance yesterday. So solid output by the offensive line. They did their job. They did what everyone expected them to do against an opponent like Western Kentucky. But to me, the real story yesterday was the play of the Ohio State defense. That was the unit that figured to get the biggest test in this game, the pass rush in particular. Now, we all knew the Buckeye offense would have a day against a pretty putrid Western Kentucky defense, but the Silver Bullets were the reason the Buckeyes won in the dominant fashion that they did. I mean, from the 8-minute mark of the second quarter, the defense snuffed out any notion that the Hilltoppers were going to make this a game. Now, in our preview pod, we talked about third down as a pretty big area of concern for the Buckeyes. I just talked about third down conversions on offense. Now, through 2 games, Ohio State was not nearly up to its standard, both in converting third downs as an offense and getting off the field on third down as a defense. Yesterday, that was not the case, though. Western Kentucky only 3 of 15 on third down, and a big reason for that was the pass rush. Now, Jack Sawyer, who I took to task last week for being a missing person in the Ohio State pass rush, led the Buckeyes with 7 quarterback pressures. JT Tuimoloau finished right behind him with 6. Now, neither recorded a sack, but they both applied big-time pressure on Austin Reed when it really mattered yesterday. They were in Reed's face on virtually every big passing down. Now, according to PFF, Sawyer and Tuimoloau were the starting defense's highest graded defenders. Sawyer finished with a grade of 93.4, Tuimoloau 90.7. I also love what I saw out of defensive tackle Tyleik Williams. He was a factor once again. Williams is having a great season. He had a sack on Austin Reed and recovered a fumble in the end zone for a touchdown. Now, at linebacker, I thought Steele Chambers played lights out. He finished second on the team in tackles with 8, including 1 tackle for loss. He also intercepted Austin Reed in the third quarter and had 1 other pass breakup. Chambers finished with the defense's second highest tackling grade of 82.3. That's according to PFF, and an overall grade of 83.3. Now, if you're one of these Ohio State fans that thinks C.J. Hicks should be playing, and look, for the record, I'd love to see Hicks play as well. I'm sorry to tell you, you're going to be waiting until 2024 to see that. Now, Hicks may prove to be the higher upside player when he does get his opportunities, but Chambers right now is entirely too valuable to take off the field. I also think he's an underrated playmaker for this defense as well. I think people forget the big plays that Chambers has turned in his career. I mean, remember, he had an interception against Georgia in the Peach Bowl. So great performance, I thought, out of Chambers yesterday, and very solid in the tackling department. Defense, by the way, single digits in missed tackles again, only 8, I believe, for the defense. So they tackled very well against an offense that is known for making things happen, after the catch. So really love what I saw out of the defense in that regard. Finally, Denzel Burke. Man, I think he's starting to make a real case as a Thorpe Award finalist. 2 more pass breakups for Burke yesterday. He also forced a fumble on Hilltopper running back Davion Irvin Poindexter that was recovered for the touchdown by Tyleik Williams. I mentioned that earlier. Burke has been a lockdown corner for the Buckeye defense, and against a potent Western Kentucky passing game, I mean, there was nothing doing on Burke's side of the field at all. Now, I've been complaining for the last 10 months about the lack of splash plays from the Ohio State defense, but yesterday, 8 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 4 turnovers, including 2 defensive scores. You also had freshman cornerback Jermaine Matthews come up with a pick 6 on Western Kentucky's backup quarterback Bronson Barron. Yesterday was a much-needed deluge of everything I wanted and needed to see from the Ohio State defense heading into the big matchup with Notre Dame next Saturday. The Buckeye defense was great on third down. I've already mentioned that. 3 of 15 for Western Kentucky on third down. They were excellent both in pass rush and coverage. According to PFF, the overall grades for pass rush and coverage were over 90 for the Buckeye defense. Now, Austin Reed, look, man, he led the country in passing yards last season, and the Buckeyes held him to 21 of 37 for only 207 yards, 1 touchdown, and a pick. Reed only had 35 yards passing after halftime. Last season, Western Kentucky was 12th nationally in offensive yards per play at 6.71. Yesterday, the Buckeye defense held the Hilltoppers to 3.9 yards per play. Now, through 3 games, the Buckeyes are 3rd nationally in total defense, allowing 223.7 yards per game, and they're 2nd nationally in defensive yards per play at 3.63. So it's only 3 games. It's come against, three overmatched opponents, but the early returns by the Buckeye defense, especially what we saw yesterday, very, very positive, and I'm feeling very, very good about the Buckeyes now heading into this game with Notre Dame. So now we can finally turn our attention to the Irish. According to DraftKings, Ohio State is an early 3-point favorite in that game. Now, after a bit of a slow start against Western Michigan yesterday, the Irish pulled away in the second half against the Chippewas to win 41-17. Notre Dame quarterback Sam Hartman was impressive again yesterday, finishing 16-26 for 330 yards and 3 more touchdown passes. Running back Audric Estime looked great again for the Irish. Estime finished with 176 yards on 20 carries and a touchdown. Right now, Estime leads the country in rushing yards with 521, and he's 12th nationally, averaging 8.27 yards per carry. Wow. And the Notre Dame defense is right behind Ohio State in the national rankings. The Irish are 4th nationally in total defense, averaging 234 yards per game, and they're 3rd in defensive yards per play at 3.82. On paper, this looks like it's going to be a great battle between two top 10 heavyweights. Paige and I are going to be there. I think CP might even make the trip as well. We're going to have a lot more to say about this game in our preview pod on Thursday. But I got to say, I'm feeling bullish right now on the Buckeyes, and I love our chances to come out of South Bend with a victory. And real quick before I wrap things up, I thought Penn State and Michigan were underwhelming against overmatched opponents yesterday. Now, Penn State never trailed at Illinois, but I was left wondering how things might have played out if Illinois quarterback Luke Altmaier wasn't a goddamn turnover machine. 4 INTs by Altmaier and 5 total turnovers by a pretty hapless Illinois offense. But it was not a great day by Penn State quarterback Drew Aller. 16 of 33 for only 208 yards passing and no touchdowns. And Penn State's star duo at running back, Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, were not huge factors in this game. Only 54 yards on 13 carries for Allen and 37 yards on 11 carries for Singleton. Now, Penn State grinds it out 30-13, but maybe we need to slow our roll a little bit on Drew Aller and that Penn State offense now that we've seen them against a decent Big Ten defense. Now, meanwhile, in the Big House last night, Michigan was an underwhelming 31-6 winner over Bowling Green. J.J. McCarthy, ay caramba, 8 of 13 for 143 yards and 3 terrible interceptions, including one in the end zone. Now, McCarthy did have 2 touchdown passes, but come on, it's Bowling Green. The Michigan run game they were fine. 169 yards on 31 carries. Blake Corum led the Wolverines with 101 yards on 12 carries and 2 touchdowns. But look, if the national media is going to shit on Ohio State for a lackluster performance against Youngstown State last week, I can't imagine there'll be much turd polishing for this one for the Wolverines. The 3 picks by McCarthy against perhaps the worst team in the MAC. Are we good with that, Michigan fans? I don't know. That's not a great sign. Now, I'm looking at where Michigan's first 3 opponents landed in Phil Steele's preseason rankings here. Eastern Carolina, 90th, UNLV, 117th, and Bowling Green, 120th. We're not going to know anything about Michigan probably until November 11th when they travel to Penn State. Until then, they're going to be largely measured by what they accomplished last year, I think. But yeah, not a great look, I don't think, from Michigan, struggling as they did against Bowling Green. And J.J. McCarthy, man, makes you wonder, a defense that can make him throw into tight windows and make good decisions, maybe even put a little pressure on him. I think Michigan can be had by a defense that can do that. And Ohio State might just have that kind of a defense this year, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Look for a Notre Dame preview pod from Paige, Chad, and myself, more than likely on Thursday, though we may do it on Wednesday. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and visit our website at southstandsosu.com.